And as the war continues still in Ukraine, what is next? What is the next steps? Potential ceasefire? Will Vladimir Putin stop? And everything there. It's important for NATO, important for Europe, and of course important for the world. We'll talk about now someone who knows a lot about national security, about defense issues across the Atlantic, a transatlantic expert, Ian Brzezinski, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Pleasure to join you.
So let's jump right in. Where we are right now with what Vladimir Putin is doing, what he's not doing really, where do you assess the next step for this potential peace process? What's going to happen next?
I think the next step will really be driven by what the Europeans do. Will they start leveraging the power they have, not only to put pressure on Putin, but also to shape the American perspective? Right now, the problem that we have in Europe, if I could say that, is that Trump doesn't really believe the Europeans are committed to defending Ukraine. I think he sees it as half-hearted. So I'm taking my hat off to President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer for trying to kind of devise a European approach, the core being perhaps some sort of peacekeeping or deterrent force. I think the larger and more robust that force is, the more likely it's going to encourage Trump to be a little bit more forward-leaning in the leveraging of transatlantic power to pressure Putin to cease his aggression against Ukraine.
And then also, if we're looking at the tenets of any kind of ceasefire, what do you see as parts of that? What's important? You mentioned European security guarantees, boots on the ground potentially. What other parts do you see as a successful formula for any type of ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine?
A successful ceasefire in Ukraine is going to require pressure by the transatlantic community in the form of a deterrent force that will ensure and secure Ukraine against any Russian violations of that ceasefire. Second, it's going to have to involve non-recognition of Russian sovereignty over the territory it's occupying. It's going to require the sustainment of sanctions, if not the increasing of sanctions, to pressure Russia to leave those territories. And it's going to have to provide a road for Ukraine to secure NATO membership. Those are the core principles or core elements of a viable and enduring ceasefire.
Now, we've heard threats that Trump and the United States would potentially walk away from any kind of ceasefire negotiations if nothing is achieved soon. How realistic is that kind of threat of the U.S. walking away from all this?
Well, with President Trump, it's really hard to predict. It would be a real abdication of American responsibility to its own self-interest and to the shared interests we have with our European allies and partners. It would leave Ukraine significantly weaker, and it would embolden Russia. And that's a recipe not only for further aggression into Ukraine, but also a wider war.
And we've seen kind of in the last days, we had a private meeting now with in Rome at the funeral of the Pope. And we know that Trump and also Zelensky spoke. Do you sense that made any difference? Is Trump coming around to a different view of maybe more what Ukraine's perspective is in all this?
You know, that meeting gave some people hope, but I think what you really need to look for is tangible action by Trump. You know, for over 30 days now, Trump has been pleading with Putin, asking for Putin to accept a ceasefire. Putin has disdainfully dismissed those requests, continued his aggression, cynically asked for a ceasefire to protect his parade on May 8th and 9th. You know, it's time for Trump to act on his threats and actually start ratcheting up, not only ratcheting up sanctions against Russia, but also reanimating the flow of assistance to Ukraine. It's time for Trump to have his own tranche of assistance to Ukraine. That's the way you put pressure on Putin to accept a ceasefire.
On your experience as well, I mean, you're Assistant Defense Secretary for Europe some time ago, also spent time on security issues in the Senate. Looking at also the capabilities of what Europe has, can it do and step forward and step up really on the level that is needed if the United States doesn't provide what it needs for the type of peacekeeping? Like, does Europe have the material, the forces, the wherewithal to do all this?
Well, you know, one of the tragedies of this conflict is the failure of the transatlantic community to leverage its massive overmatch of geopolitical and geoeconomic and military power compared to Russia. You know, NATO has a combined GDP of about $55 trillion. That's 25 times that of Russia. It spends some $1.5 trillion on defense. Russia has a defense budget probably somewhere well less than 200 million. You think of the quality of U.S. and West European, Central European forces. It is stunning that we haven't enabled Ukraine to decisively defeat this Russian aggression. So we have that in the transatlantic community writ large. To answer your question, can you do it without the United States? Well, let me put it this way. Europe probably has a GDP of roughly $23 trillion to Russia's $2. 500 or so billion dollars in defense spending to Russia's 200. Europe has a significant amount of leverage. It needs to actualize that leverage, and in doing so, will not only help secure Ukraine. I think it would create the greatest prospect of the United States shifting its posture to be part of the win strategy. So it's in Europe's self-interest to leverage its own power. It's urgent to defend Ukraine, and it's the best way to convince Trump to do the right thing.
And also looking at defense spending, that's key. Obviously, looking at a country like Poland, nearing almost that 5% marker, leading NATO. Other countries also stepping up. Looking at the Hague summit of NATO coming up pretty soon. Do you expect that threshold? I mean, it's too early to tell what that number will be, but what are your expectations from the NATO summit coming up pretty soon?
Well, one, Poland's to be commended for how seriously it takes defense, how seriously it takes its responsibilities as a NATO ally. I visited Polish troops in Afghanistan years ago, so there is no ally that exceeds Poland's commitment to NATO, and I salute Poland for that. As for the other allies of the NATO summit, there will clearly be further progress in expanding defense spending. I can't say with confidence they'll commit to 5%, but there's a growing recognition across the alliance that the increases in defense spending we've seen over the last several years need to continue. 2% is an insufficient floor. More and more are beginning to recognize 5% is probably what is necessary, not only to defend transatlantic interests in Europe, but elsewhere around the world. So I have my fingers crossed that'll happen at the summit.
Then also a final question, if we're looking at, the dream for Zelensky is NATO membership. Where are we at that right now? I mean, we've heard sort of that mood shift a little bit with some countries kind of reneging on that. Even President Duda has stepped forward saying there'll be concessions that have to be made. What do you make of the assessment of Ukraine's potential joining in the near future or ever, really?
Well, those who are advocating for the permanent denial of NATO membership to Ukraine are basically reanimating Yalta. Yalta Agreement 1945 enabled Stalin to extend the sphere of influence over Central and Eastern Europe. That sphere of influence ended in 1989 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And for the first time, we have people who are proposing to reanimate a dimension of that. And that would be the form of denying Ukraine its right to NATO membership, giving Russia a new sphere of influence in the region. And if you give Russia that reward, you can expect that sphere of influence to grow.
And then final point, Three Seas Initiative, some have criticized it for falling short of expectations. It's 10 years now, marking that in Warsaw. What's your assessment? What's the American perspective now? Is this bipartisan? Does it have a future? What's the assessment of Three Seas?
Well, the Three Seas Initiative is a Central European launched and led initiative. It's a very innovative initiative designed to leverage the power of private capital to deepen cross-border infrastructure integration in the region, particularly on a north-south dimension. It's an established brand in the region. The Three Seas Summits now are a regular format for the meeting of Central European and now Greek heads of state. The Greeks have joined. I understand today Turkey and Spain came and joined as strategic partners. So there's genuine momentum behind the initiative. The Three Seas Investment Fund is not perfect, but I got to tell you, on a baseline measure, its returns on investment are somewhere in 15%. I would like to invest in that. Clearly, the fund needs to be reformed and changed so they can be more attractive to private capital. But when you have a fund that's investing in the region of Central and Eastern Europe and getting a return of 15%, it shows that there's something there, that this is a model that there's more than enough proof of concept to show it can work. We just need to move the Three Seas Initiative into Three Seas 2.0. And I would hope that the governments of Central and Eastern Europe will drive it forward in that direction. And if it does, it'll get continued support from the United States.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate all those words about security in this region. Really matters, and always appreciate your words. Brzezinski there, thank you. Thank you for watching. That's Sasha Farbach for TVP World in Warsaw.